Okay, well, thanks very much for inviting us to come today. The division of labour is that I'm going to give the presentation, and Andrew has a hard bit of dealing with the questions, so make the questions as hard as you can. Dealing with them. We have been working for some time on a project on surveillance during the Cold War, and that has involved us spending a lot of time at the National Archives in Kew looking at MI5 files, some of which have now been opened. And so, not all the files by any means have been opened, but there's been a lot of files have been withheld, a lot have been destroyed apparently, and those which have been published or released have been heavily redacted. Now, why these files are important is two reasons. One is because there is hardly any evidence of surveillance of trade union members or activists. And the reason why there is so little evidence is because they're all screened out. But sometimes some of the stuff gets through. Friday afternoon, whoever's doing the surveillance of the files is maybe half asleep, and the odd thing does slip through. And what that reveals, and why this is important, what it does reveal is that there has been historically systematic and systemic surveillance of trade union activists by the state in the form of MI5 and special branches. We're not just speculating about it, we know for a fact that this has gone on, and you would have to be delusional to think that it's still not going on. I mean, this is a long practice with a long historical record. It's not just the Consulting Association or the Economic League, it is the agents of the state. We've got one file in particular, which in a sense is quite emblematic. It's a file of a man called Bert Edwards, and we wrote about this file last year in the Morning Star, but given that no one has read it, I'll tell you again what happened in Bert Edwards' case. It's a really quite interesting discovery, I think. So anyway, so you get this file, Bert Edwards, he has a number, I forget, KV, whatever his file is. And if you look, there's a lot of personal information about Bert Edwards. If you've seen the Consulting Association files, you will recognize the pattern. So we've got some personally abusive comments about how he looks, about his accent, about his children, about his family association, and by chance it happens that his father-in-law was, I think, James Connolly, which perked me up a bit because James Connolly was one of my two great political heroes. As well as being a hip supporter, he was a political hero for other reasons. Born in Edinburgh, so Ireland claims James Connolly, but actually he was born in Edinburgh. Now, what this it also tells us about Bert Edwards' motorcycles, all kinds of personal information about the number, about the fact he's got the Norton, he's about to change it for another model, which I've never heard of. There's all this personal information about this guy sitting there on this file. And what it also tells us is how they got the information, basically about the surveillance methods that MI5 were using at the time. And if we just look, just at all the, it's just a jumble of material in this file. But if you go through it and you sift it, you'll see that special branch officers were attending union meetings, so they infiltrated the union, which in this case was the National Union of Vehicle Builders. And this guy, I mean, he wasn't that prominent. He was the London Secretary of the Unions. He wasn't a national figure by any manner of means. But all the local strike activity was infiltrated, so they were present in the meetings. If they couldn't get in because you had to show your union cards, it is clear that they were basically loitering outside, trying to find out who was going in and trying to find out what was going on inside the meeting for which they had been excluded. Other sources of information were, even in those days, were intercepted phone calls. And you see transcriptions of phone calls appear on the file, intercepted mail, and in those days there was no photocopiers even, so things had to be either typed out, letters typed out and put on the file, or they had to be photographed with an old-fashioned camera and put on the file as photographic material. Otherwise, you get stuff from third-party sources, and so there was a bug called Lascar at Communist Party headquarters, and anybody whose name appears in the course of any conversation at the Communist Party is picked up, and the entire conversation is deposited on the individual's file. So there are a few bits and pieces about Edwards. One, for example, that an Irish historian had phoned up the Communist Party to say that they understood that this guy, Edwards, who was in fact a Labour councillor, was in some way related to James Connolly, didn't have any information about it. So that was enough for a recording and for the information to go on the file. And then his TUC activities were subject to surveillance. And what it transpires is that MI5 had a special unit which was responsible for trade union activities, including the TUC, and the unit in question, I think B1D was the information, the organisation or the operation within MI5, and they would clip newspapers and actually get a list of delegates to the TUC every year, and all this would go in your personal file. So you're beginning to feel a bit edgy at the moment. And if you think maybe I'm under surveillance, you probably are. So being here is probably enough to get you there. So the next question is, so we get really three parts of the story. One is what sort of stuff is being recorded. It's just the whole gamut of human detritus, really. Secondly, how do they get it? Well, they get it from a wide range of different means, and these were fairly basic methods in those days, obviously much more sophisticated today. But the other issue, well, what do they use it for? This information is not just being collected for the sake of it, it's being collected for a purpose. And a lot of the information on individuals was being used to exclude them, and we know this, to exclude people from certain public sector positions, from certain public sector jobs. But in this case, this guy, he was a vehicle builder. He wasn't engaged in public sector activity, and that's what makes this so interesting. And what was happening in the file, we've got this, there are examples of letters, I don't know why they allowed them to remain there, but of MI5 officers contacting employers. And one of the employers is a company called Park Royal Coachworks, somewhere in London. The officer in question, his name has not been redacted, so presumably his children are still around. A guy called Flying Officer G.C. Laws is the MI5 officer, who writes to this company to say that you want to get rid of this guy because he's no good. And legally he's done nothing wrong, but you want to get rid of him on some, the phrase is used, on some trade pretext, trade reasons. And this is the comfortable bit, but this is the very uncomfortable bit. And if you have any trouble getting rid of them for trade reasons, you should enlist the help of the local union official. And so this is, in a sense, what is going on. And there are other examples of this guy being hounded from job to job throughout the 40s and 50s. And at one point, the story of the rat reminded me of one piece in this file, which is he got so exasperated that he'd gone round to one employer and basically occupied the place, a one-man sit-in. How dare you offer overtime to these vehicle builders for the people like me who are currently unemployed? He was eventually removed from the premises, but that maybe was another example of leverage, which in this case didn't work. Now, my sense is that, this file, it's actually, as Andrew found the file, it was a fantastic discovery, because what it does do is provide clear evidence that the state was involved in surveillance and discrimination and victimization of trade union officials. It reveals the targets of state activity historically. It reveals the methods which the state used against these individuals. It reveals the way in which this information was used against the individuals in question. It reveals beyond any question that the state was involved in the process of blacklisting, victimization, and discrimination. And it involves also the close connection, liaison between Special Branch and MI5 in relation to these activities. Now, at the end of this article that we produced last year, we said this was an invitation to the then Labour leader, Mr. Miliband, who had 10 years on this as on many other issues. But basically, we said to him, look, there's a problem here. And it is a problem which is manifesting itself in multiple ways. It's blacklisting, it's Orgreave, it's multiple issues of discrimination. And we're basically, there must be a public inquiry. But that public inquiry has to be far-reaching and wide-ranging, because there are a number of very basic questions that now, which this campaign has helped to expose. And the first question is, how many trade unionists have been or are being the subject of state surveillance? That's the first. We need to know. What is the scale of this operation, of the state's complicity in this process? Secondly, who are these people? Who are the victims of this state operation against trade unionists? And what remedies are they now entitled to be claiming? And what obligations does the state have in relation to these individuals? Third question, why was this being done? But what justification and explanation can we find to explain the persecution of Bert Edwards? It doesn't just affect him, but obviously affects his family, his children, and his grandchildren, many of whom may still be alive today. The fourth question is, how was this information collected? And were the means used to collect this information and store it, were they illegal? And if they were illegal, what are the remedies now which would be available for those who are currently the subject of this kind of surveillance, and those in the past, their families, the legacy, the debt which has to be met in relation to past family members. The fifth question is, how is this information used? How has it been used in the past, and how is it being used at the moment? Sixth question, I won't go through them all, but where are the files now? What happened to this information? Has it been destroyed, as sometimes is claimed? Or are there backup copies, as we believe to be the case, which are being held elsewhere? So, a number of questions, but my sense is that this campaign, the Blacklist Support Group, has been a fantastic campaign. This has been a fantastic year, as Phil said. Unite has performed heroically in the defence of the Blacklist support workers and the workers themselves. Obviously, all credit to them above all else. But this is really only the start. What this has done has been to expose a huge problem. And we don't know how many thousands of victims there are, but I think the idea of a public inquiry, really to get to the bottom of that, that is now the urgent task. Thanks very much.